Hello, welcome once again to Urban X-Files. My name is Keith and today we're going to continue our talk on witches. We're going to move to Liverpool this time, where there have been numerous accounts of witches in the area of Merseyside. But believe it or not, the biggest place in England for a mass witch hunt was in Lancashire, which is the famous Pendle Witches. It's a phenomenal story. But going back into Liverpool, we have our own history of witches. The earliest one, which I mentioned when I went to St James's Gardens, the cemetery, was Jenna Green or Ginny Greenteeth. There was a song, a kid's song that they'd made of it, which is, on the mount there is a lady, who she is I do not know. All she wants is gold and silver, all she wants is a very fine bow. So that is the nursery rhyme song they used to sing about Ginny Greenteeth. And again, when I said the mount that is talked about is the mount in St James's Cemetery, which is a vast sandstone outcrop that has been a form of a mystical site for many centuries, and it has always had associations with pre-Christian occults and obviously the witch movement or the Wiccan movement. And then you can actually visit the mount today. It's in the corner. If you watch the video that I done, you will see whereabouts it is. It's in the northwestern corner of St James's Cemetery. You'll not only see graffiti which dates all the way back to 1870, you'll see curious black magic symbols such as pitchforks, which is a symbol of the devil's forks, and an ancient three-legged trident, which now symbolizes the Isle of Man. This symbol was the coat of arms of a greatly feared Manx magician, the Manannán Mac Lir, and he was said to have a cloak of invisibility, just like Harry Potter does. Whether he did, I doubt it, I don't know, but who am I to say? And he also had the power of levitation. He was able to fly, and he could kill with his potent magic spells. And his gigantic tomb can still be seen at Peel Castle. I've not seen it myself, so it would be interesting to see. And there's also swastikas engraved into the sandstone edifice in St James's mouth. And obviously the swastika, as you know, is the symbol of the Nazis. But believe it or not, it was actually a symbol with ancient occult long before the Nazis has used it as their symbol. In fact, I used to be a Reiki master some years ago, and I was very surprised to see in the ancient texts with Reiki and different things that have gone on for many, many, many years, that the swastika was used as a powerful symbol back then. And it's said that there was, in Edwardian times, workmen were digging up the St James's Mount, because I think it was used as a quarry originally, when they came upon an old statue of sort of some long-haired woman with, it's said to have a gown, but I'm unsure whether this was, if it was buried, it would still have the clothing on it, I'm unsure. The figure was said to have outstretched arms, and around the circular plinth that she stood on were the words in what looked like ancient ruin glyphs, so like hieroglyphics, but in ancient ruin times, I'm not sure. And unbelievable as it may seem, a workman who was leading his workmen, the labourers, and uprooted the statue, which would have been of significant archaeological value because of how long it was buried on this thing for. And then so he just took it home with him. There were further excavations revealed that the statue had been at the center of a number of dwellings arranged in a circle around this mysterious sculpture, as if the inhabitants of the dwellings had revered it. And there was an alleged sighting of this statue in a garden in Walton, which was noted in the 1950s, and it was claimed that this inscription upon the plinth had spelt out the name Jenna with a G or Jenna with a J, which was in reference to the medieval witch Jenna Green, which we talked about before, which is Ginny Greenteeth. And Jenna Green, who later corrupted Ginny Green, who was driven out of her coven because she abused her powers to obtain money and also to bewitch the spell of love onto a man who was promised to another woman. The myths of yesterday say that Jenna's community depended on some sacred spring, and such a spring oozes from the sandstone outcrop of St. James's Cemetery today. If you go back and watch the video, you will see where I pointed out where this spring is. And it's Liverpool's only surviving running spring, and it was rediscovered in the 1700s by the quarrymen who were digging the quarry, which was what St. James's Cemetery is now. Doctors had tested the water in the spring as a cure for the loss of appetite, nervous disorders, lowness of spirits, depression, anxiety, headaches, rickets, eye problems, all kinds. And it was in the mid 1600s when Sir Edward Moore, a Liverpudlian landlord, suspected one of his tenants, the widow Bridge of Castle Street, of being a witch. She confessed that she was in fact a sorceress, along with her sisters. Now the sisters said they had become witches upon the death of their mother, who had also been a witch, and it was handed down through family generations. And they, having nothing to leave them, the mother gave them the gift of witchcraft, and gave them a familiar. A familiar is a witch's pet. This pet in particular was a talking cat. Now, the cat is said to have been there to spy on the enemies. Some people believe, although the cat is a familiar, others believe that the cat had been shifted into by these witches so that they could easily stalk the enemies and do what they needed to do. And instead of sentencing these witches, they were evicted from their house in Castle Street, and they were exiled from Liverpool, and they moved to a rundown cottage on a site which is now known as Cantrell Farm or Stockbridge Village. And the story goes that in the late 1700s, early 1800s, Castle Street was to be widened to allow more traffic and pedestrians better access to the thoroughfares of Dale Street and Lord Street. But before the widening of Castle Street, only two carriages was able to pass one another in its narrow lane, with many old fallen down houses and crumbling buildings were pulled down during this redevelopment, with new properties being developed and erected, and places, things like the Liver buildings, you know, they were made in the late 1800s, early 1900s, which are phenomenal buildings, thankfully still here today. An old tenant was forced to move out of her ancient wooden home on Castle Street, and she was given very little compensation as it was a compulsory purchase. and the money she was given happened to be stolen by one of the workmen in charge of a group of builders who were employed to build Haywood's Bank. Now, this witch had cursed the foreman for stealing the little money she'd been given, and she went to stay with her sister, who worked at the Golden Lion Inn on Dale Street in Liverpool city centre. The boss of the builders, the foreman, was told by one of the Irish workmen that the person he'd stole from was in fact a witch, and that her coven were to be avoided at all times. The Irishman advised his boss to give back the money he had wrongfully stolen, or he would face the wrath of a pissed off witch and her fellow coven members. Now, he told the Irishman to get on with his work and to stop wasting time by talking nonsense. And this evil boss of these builders had tormented and ridiculed this old woman at the idea of her being a witch. But unknown to the foreman, she was in fact a witch. In fact, she wasn't just a witch, she was a very powerful witch who had been the head of the coven. Now, most witches of the coven lived at an old house situated somewhere on Dale Street. And when the foreman had gone to the Golden Lion Inn, it was on his afternoon break, he heard even more stories about these witches from an old sea captain he got into conversation with. And the captain had said that the witches had a great black metal cauldron which they used to boil unholy concoctions and spells made from parts of human corpses stolen from churchyards, from decaying animal carcasses and all kinds of gruesome things. And the witches had also apparently been seen to fly about on their broomsticks. Whether that's just some fanciful part of the story is more likely, but who knows? And they've been seen to fly out of their house on brooms late into the night and seen over the many buildings in Liverpool. And the witches often took flight to Wales, the Isle of Man, Ireland, and other parts of the UK. Some even went as far as Ireland, and this is where the Irish sailors had become aware of this most powerful witch in their coven. Obviously, the builder replied, "What a load of cobswobble. Rubbish." He didn't believe it. And the old woman, she came up to the foreman in the tavern, and she pointed him out to his sister. And she said, "This is the man who stole my money. I have cursed him to die a slow and painful death." He hurled his glass of ale at the old lady, and she tried to claw his face, but his sister had managed to pull back the old lady and took her back upstairs in the room in the tavern. But later that day, the builders left the site on Castle Street and they started to travel back to their homes as it was the end of the day, when some fog descended on the city, which came out of nowhere. And it literally had blotted out everything within minutes. The foreman of the building company was stumbling over the mounds of rubble on Castle Street demolition site as he tried to make his way home. Then people in the area heard a man shouting and screaming, and these sounds seemed to come from above, which they were perplexed by. How is the sounds of a man coming from the sky? Keep in mind, they didn't have airplanes back then. When the fog had lifted the following morning, the foreman was nowhere to be found. Then one of the workers had noticed something that was very, very strange. There was something on a weather vane on the exchange building in the distance. Those who have binoculars or exceptional eyesight said it looked like a man had been hung on the top of the weather vane. But when they got closer, what they witnessed would scar them for the rest of their lives. What they'd seen was a man who had been impaled upon the weather vane. Now, it went right through his midsection, so he was literally impaled. Now, the man would have had to have fallen from great height for this to happen. As I said before, remember, there was no such things as airplanes and helicopters, so it was impossible for this man to have fallen from the sky. And given this weather vane was one of the highest buildings in the city at the time, it was impossible for him to have fallen from anywhere higher. So an old sea captain got his telescope, unfolded it and took a look. And as I said before, the sight he's seen had etched upon his brain forever. He saw a red-headed man. Well, it was red-headed because he was covered in blood. He could see the blood trickling down the weather vane, and it had dripped upon the dome of the exchange, and a crowd had begun to form, and people began to wonder who this man was. A balloonist name had recently flown over the area, and some people thought it was possibly a victim from the balloon, but it wasn't. As one of the people looked through the captain's telescope, the man who had been impaled on the weather vane had been recognized. It was the foreman of the builders. But how on earth had this man ended up being skewered upon the weather vane hundreds of feet in the air? And as a crowd watched, a number of large black birds flew from the north and circled the roof of the exchange. It was a muster of crows, or a murder of crows as I should say. And the crows are being seen to be the carriers into the afterlife, and like the raven. I'll go into that in another video. And these birds pecked away at the remains of the man, bit by bit, and then it was just the carcass left, because no one was able to go up to remove it. It was impossible back then. It took a lot of time, money and effort for this to happen. The authorities did make plans to retrieve the body, and the crows had tore this man apart. And in the afternoon, a violent thunderstorm erupted upon the city and had struck the town. It hailstoned, and they pelted down on all these people who had witnessed this guy impaled on the weather vane. Then something crazy happened. A bolt of lightning had hit the weather vane and had scorched the man, and he literally fell apart as it dropped from the weather vane. The legs, the arms, the intestines, the genitals, the head, it bounced off the domed roof and fell onto the ground by the crowd. The extensive bloodstain on the dome had remained for many weeks, until the rains had finally washed it all away. The body parts were collected and buried in a pauper's grave at a local churchyard, and the workers continued building the bank on Castle Street. But each and every day during the lunch break, they would often talk and speculate how the late foreman had ended up on the tip of the weather vane. A slow young man around the area, who was called Sam, had helped out on the building site, said he had seen what had happened to the foreman. The young man struggled to find the words to describe the events that had taken place, but what he was able to remember in his mind as he spoke about what he witnessed, he said, "The women came down and they took him into the air." "What women is that, Sam?" asked one of the builders. "They were all in black and they were sitting on brooms. They took him up," Sam said, and started to grin as he recalled how these women in black swooped down on the foreman and grabbed him, and then as they flew up, they impaled him with force on the cast iron weather vane, their punishment for stealing from a member of their coven. The builders did find it hard to believe Sam's story, yet they knew the boy couldn't lie, nor did he have the ability to make up this type of story, because he was a simple lad. And the witches of that coven have descendants still to this day all over Merseyside. What do you guys think of today's story? Do you think it was true? Do you think it happened? Who are we to say? Hope you enjoyed the story. If so, don't forget to smash that like button, and take care, and see you all in the next video. Peace.